Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Reigns website at praetorreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Now, on with the podcast.
Yeah, there are a lot of kind of classical liberals in our party who I hugely respect, but who say, no, we must do this organically, etc. Well, let me tell you, we've been trying to do this organically for, 400 years or more. And we've ended up with no black MPs elected.
As everyone is aware, this year has been a very dramatic year in terms of race relations and equality, and the issue has very much come to the fore both in the UK and around the world. So our guests are in a perfect position to show us, are the Lib Dems doing it right? Are the Lib Dems doing it wrong? What we could do better and why the campaign has had to be founded in the first place. So first we would welcome back to the podcast our very own Josh Barbarinde, who is now OBE. So congratulations, Josh. Welcome to the podcast again.
Good to be back. Thank you for having me again, John. It's always a hoot.
And you are, let me just get it right, you are vice chair. Is that correct?
That is correct, indeed. Humbly serving our leader, Ade.
And of course, he's just cued him perfectly. Ade, would you like to introduce yourself to the podcast?
Hello. Yes, my name. Thank you, John. I should say firstly, my name is Adeyemo. I am the chair of the RDC, Racial Diversity Campaign. I am also the group leader of the Lib Dems on Solihull Council, and I've been a parliamentary candidate now 3 times. Once in Meriden and twice in Solihull. I stood for the European Parliament, narrowly missed out on getting elected. Don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Just a few days ago, I just heard that I have been elected onto the committee of the ALDC as well. So, which ties in well with what we're trying to do with the RDC.
Congratulations. Well, we've got some bunch of winners, recent winners on the show. So this should be a very positive show. But I suppose the first place for us to start is, why have you set up the Racial Diversity Campaign?
Oh, I think we did not set it up. It's probably the first thing to say. Right. It was set up by the federal board. And it was originally actually set up in 2019. But partly because of Brexit, partly because of snap general elections, it just never really got off the ground. And so what they did was that when they had new elections for federal board, our terms coincide with the federal board. So when they had new elections, they elected a new committee for the RDC. So myself, Josh, and one of our other vice chairs, who unfortunately has just resigned, Deepa Vaya, were charged with basically getting it back off the ground and getting it moving again.
And Josh, why is it important? I mean, like I say, it seems like an obvious question, but how important is it?
Well, it's hugely important because as a party, we've not done so well when it comes to the racial diversity, particularly of our parliamentary party, particularly in the House of Commons. I'm proud that we have Layla Moran and Munira Wilson as people of colour among our MPs. But, for example, since our founding in 1988, we have never elected an MP of black heritage to the House of Commons, ever. In fact, our predecessor party, the Liberal Party, if we go back to 1888, still no black MP. If we go to that predecessor, 1688, the Whig Party, or thereabouts, that time scale, no MP of black heritage. And, you know, those kind of issues exist across lots of different ethnic heritage groups. And so what's really important about the Racial Diversity Campaign is ensuring not just that the ladder is being lowered to support people from ethnic minority communities to climb up into positions of elected office, is actually to make sure that there is a ladder, full stop.
And I suppose on the website, I've checked out, there's 3 pillars to this mission that you guys are on. And it's, I mean, right back at the start, to support candidates to just come forward, to become approved candidates in the first place, to take that leap. Because you're right, we have Layla and Munira in the parliamentary party, but I do wonder, and I haven't got the stats for this, how many people from different backgrounds are actually in winnable seats across the country, and I bet it's probably tiny.
It is. It's minuscule is probably a better way of describing it. And you know, we've had 1 or 2 people who have been close, but they haven't quite got there. So we need to focus on both ends of the scale, really. And it's one of those things where we're currently developing a strategic plan where we need to start saying, how can we help everybody? Where are the best places to start? Because we cannot do everything at once. And which area should we focus on? One very obvious area is actually helping people start off in the first place. How do I become a candidate? Whether that's a parliamentary candidate, whether that's becoming council candidate, for example, because councils are often a good stepping stone for people who want to go into parliament. So actually just telling people what it's all about, explaining, you know, putting on information shows, mentoring. There are a lot of things we can do to help people to help themselves. And I think that's probably the main priorities are how can we help you get a foot on that ladder in the first place? We're not, you know, we cannot help you climb the ladder, but we can tell you which rungs to put your foot on. That's probably a good way of describing it.
Yeah. And I think, you know, just building on what Ade said, there are lots of different stages of the process, you know, taking someone from the position of party membership all the way to parliament. And, you know, you start off by, you know, joining the approved candidates list, you know, the national pool of candidates, which is your kind of passport, if you like, to apply for selection in different seats. So approval first, then there's selection, contesting kind of mini election within the party membership of a particular constituency to try to become the Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate for that seat, or it might be a Metro Mayor candidate, whatever. And then the last stage is, you know, running your election campaign and hopefully winning. And what's not clear at the moment is where people are getting stuck in the process. We know that there are probably quite a lot of places that people are getting stuck in, but it's not clear, you know, what's stopping that funnel. And so to help shed light on that and illuminate that, we are running a big review, a survey, essentially, to speak to members of colour from across the Liberal Democrats who may be at differing stages of that process, or maybe haven't embarked on it at all, to try to figure out where they have got stuck on the process. We'll then be looking at what some of the commonalities are. Where does the data take us? And that's going to help to inform us at the RDC as to what kind of interventions we'll be making to help unblock some of the barriers. And, you know, we've got some snippets of info already before we've synthesized it, some of which, you know, we'll be able to share here. But yeah, really, really important piece of work to find out what the problem is before creating a solution.
And I think just to add to what Josh has said as well, that, you know, we need to find out what the problems are, what the bottlenecks are, but sometimes the problems are also in the individual candidates themselves. If you have a look and if you don't think that you look like what Lib Dems consider to be the average candidate, that in itself is a barrier. So it's not necessarily a barrier of the system, that in itself is a barrier. If you don't think that you will be accepted, or if you don't think that you are what they need. So we are working to, on both sides of those barriers to try and say, how can we break down those barriers? So it's as much about perception of the individual and also the perception of others when that individual goes forward to put themselves forward for candidacy or for selection or for election, ultimately.
And I wonder, because you don't want to preempt the survey, but obviously you guys have been in the party at various levels for quite a while. So what are the main blocks for you? Obviously, you've just talked about Adi about, we don't look like a particularly diverse party from the outside. So what else is there that's being a hindrance to us actually becoming? Because we have wonderful policies. I mean, I've read the Allardyce Review. We've had lots of policy to try and make ourselves inclusive. But we don't seem to be getting over that hurdle. So what are these stumbling blocks?
Oh, Lib Dems are great on policy. If it comes to policy, we got it coming out of our ears, But seriously now, it's a whole lot of various issues. Sometimes we know that there's unconscious bias, which is part of it. We know that traditionally institutions generally, when it comes to employment, when it comes to normal life, we tend to, I say we now, as a community, you tend to employ people who look like you. That's why certain businesses go in a certain direction, because if you're not careful, you end up just having a very much of an identikit. Lib Dems are getting this whole sort of suburban identikit, usually average white. And I think that in itself is an issue. Some of the issues are to do with maybe we don't necessarily go into the areas where there's a higher density of, Black ethnic minority people, for example. So we don't do a lot of work. So there's a lot of people that we just don't get to because there's a higher density of people in certain areas. I mean, I'm here in Solihull in the West Midlands. We're very strong around the periphery and in, 4 or 5 places in Birmingham. But places like Handsworth, where there's a lot of, Black Asian people, we don't do any work. We do very little there. Those areas we don't go into, and it's partly, we need to move and they need to move. But I think we all need to move together is probably a better way of describing it. Josh can fill you in a bit more on the technical sides of it, and he has seen a bit more of the survey results than I have. That have been coming in so far.
Some insights so far based on some of that data that's kind of trickled through and some of the conversations that I've been privy to across the party are that, well, one is around the culture when it comes to the selection of candidates. So it's something that I've come across a bit of in terms of insights that other people have observed is a culture of diverse people for diverse seats and diverse people for diverse seats only. And this is something that we really need to overcome. It's something that, the Conservatives, for example, have very successfully overcome. You have people like Rishi Sunak in his Richmond constituency in Yorkshire, which, doesn't have a reputation for being the most ethnically diverse. Yet he's managed to, make waves as a member of Parliament for that seat. There are other, MPs of colour as well who you could cite as well. Kemi Badenoch, the MP for Saffron Walden, Bim Afolami in, I should know the specific seat because our candidate there is a candidate of colour, Sam Collins. But Hitchin and Harpington, that's it. So, you have the Conservatives have made some really good progress on that. Labour, I think, have done as well. But, systemically across the Liberal Democrats, people have identified that they feel there's a problem and we need to look long and hard at that.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to add to that to say that one of the other issues we have is that, Liberal Democrats are very, very fiercely local. We tend to like to say, the local party makes a final decision. However, when we have a crop of good candidates from elsewhere, there is an issue generally about how do we place those candidates in winnable. And what you said was winnable seats. And what Josh said as well is that it's okay having, 10 black candidates in Handsworth and Birmingham. We're not going to win it, But do we have, similar candidates in Twickenham? We've had one now, and she won. And that's actually a very, very good example that if you have a good candidate in a good seat, regardless of colour, they will win. So rather than just placing ethnic minorities in those diverse seats, but they are hopeless seats, it is how do we make sure that the good people get good seats, full stop.
Yeah, I mean, there is a point about us as a party being a bit more agile, I guess, about, the cross-constituency movement of Liberal Democrat talent, for sure. I think the more fundamental challenge we need to get to grips with is local parties being better resourced to develop local talent of colour in their own patches. And, we have, recently in the last couple of years seen the introduction across lots of local parties of a diversity officer role to kind of bake that drive for greater diversity into the functioning of local parties, with a view to reaching out to people from diverse communities in those constituencies and engaging them in the kind of life of the local party. But we're still kind of very early days on that as an overview across the board. But we need to invest more or support local parties to invest more in nurturing great talent of colour locally.
And I think the point I was going to raise kind of leads on from that, but also at previous conversations that we've talked a lot about parliamentary seats, but actually starting at the local level, starting on a ward level, we have 9 councillors in Preston, all of them are white, and it's a fairly diverse city. And so we have got a decision that next year, our target seat, we've already got a candidate in place, and it'll be our first BME kind of candidate of colour in a winnable seat for a very long time, and he is going to win next year. And so, but it's, he doesn't live in that ward. But we thought it's more important if he's good enough, get him in a seat where he can win. And I suppose that's what we can say to all local parties is that you can do this at a micro level. It doesn't have to be the parliamentary level. Do it at a ward level. Get some representation, and then we'll start to become the party we want to be seen as, where we're not just all white, middle class, and male, basically. What
you've described is quite a bold action to try to make certain that you enhance kind of racial diversity in that way. And I think that bold action by many across the party is going to be required. There are a lot of kind of classical liberals in our party who I hugely respect, but who say, no, we must do this organically, etc. Well, let me tell you, we've been trying to do this organically for, 400 years or more. And we've ended up with no black MPs elected. And, it's only relatively recently that we've been able to get MPs of colour elected at a general election. So, organic action just isn't going to cut it. Waiting for diversity to happen will not work. We'll be waiting for a very long time. So,
and I think, sorry, I was going to say one of the things that you both mentioned is about you get a good person and the right person for the job. So there is that issue about, are they local? Do they live locally? But I can tell you now as a councillor, if somebody gets elected and they're local and they're rubbish, you don't really want them. There's nothing worse than having a bad councillor. So what you want is somebody who's good, who's competent. And if they're good and they're competent, they can win. And I think we have to get away from this whole idea that local trumps everything. Local is important. And if you live locally, it's good to say, yes, I'm a local boy. I live from here. I'm a local boy from Eastbourne, for example.
I've never lived in the ward I represent. This is it. And I've been elected 5 times. So it isn't the be all and end all. Obviously, if you have if they have the perfect candidate, ticks all those boxes and lives locally, wonderful. But it's not a deciding factor. If you have
links with the area, you work hard, because
Yeah.
it is the work you do before you get elected that gets you elected in the first place. Once you start doing the work and people can see that you are good and you're doing the work. And these are the kinds of discussions that we need to, we are trying to have with our candidates and our prospective candidates, to say, get yourself into a position, work with a team, get developed, get respected, then you get selected, and hopefully you get elected, and then you move up the rungs of the ladder. And that's the best way to do it. There are challenges in the party about getting people into those positions in the first place, and our selection processes are another issue again. That's not quite an RDC issue as such, because we are working on the candidates. But obviously we need to prepare candidates for selection, and how we work with candidates is very important. In the longer term, whether we start looking at that aspect in the party, because obviously I'm on the Federal People Development Committee, for example, where those issues get discussed. And we do input into these organizations, these parts of the party. And Josh will probably tell you as well that once you're recognized as being part of the RDC, people actually start coming to you for a comment about all things diversity, which is useful, because it means that we can, at least help to open those doors for other people as well.
But do we have a problem? I mean, it's weird. We've had a recent podcast with the Welsh Lib Dems that we don't do a very good job in promoting how good we're doing in Wales. The fact that we have phenomenal, really good. Sorry, I couldn't even get the word out. We have really good kind of ethnic minority people within the party. I'm thinking of Shafak in Sheffield. Yet he's never really given a big party platform to really think, look how fantastic we are, not just the plain white kind of party that people put us as. Do we need to be better at that, at promoting more diverse faces?
Yes, it's a short answer to that. I mean, Shafak is probably by a long way the most prominent, I say one of the most prominent candidates, full stop, in the Northwest. And his election as an MEP just goes to show that. And it's something.
He's Northeast, I should just point out. He's Yorkshire.
Sorry,
Yorkshire. If you put him on the other side of the Pennines, he might revolt.
Sorry. I don't want to start getting Yorkshire and Lancashire fights now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a dangerous territory.
But he's one of the most prominent politicians we have up there. He works very hard. He's an inspiration to guys like ourselves. I mean, we're certainly going to be looking to use people like Shafak as much as we can, because when we have these people who are so good and who are beacons, they are then inspiration for other people to aspire to as well. And that's one of the things that we really want to focus on at the RDC, is to say, how do we, we don't have that many role models in high office. The few that we have, how do we use them to encourage other people to join, to get involved and get elected?
And Josh, you are not elected at the moment. So is this something that we also need to think of, people who, because not being elected isn't the be all and end all of being in politics, it's a team effort. So what else outside of just being a candidate would we want people from diverse backgrounds to get involved with?
Yeah, well, I think, you've made a really important point that being a candidate or an MP or a councillor kind of aren't the only ways of being able to make a really positive and valuable contribution to the party. I mean, fundamentally, we exist to win political power so that we can do things in the way that we think is best. And I think that, the Liberal way is the best way. But what other roles can people play? Well, as I said, within each local party, they have a really important role to play in nurturing diverse talent, engaging with diverse communities across the constituency to ensure that kind of Liberal Democrat campaign priorities locally reflect every segment of the community, not just, those who are overrepresented everywhere else, or in many other pockets of our party. So I think those are some really important roles they can play. I was talking with a new group, the Black Liberal Democrats, a couple of days ago, and most of the members are not elected, but they have contributed to reports and reviews to help air the opinion of segments of the Black community within the Liberal Democrats. And in fact, they've been speaking about forming almost a kind of guerrilla campaign task force that will descend to different constituencies where a person of colour is running to help nudge them over the line. So there are loads of different ways of being able to get involved and contribute. Those ways are not kind of exclusive to people of colour alone, by the way. Everybody in our party has an interest, a stake, and a responsibility to contribute, whether they're elected or not.
Yeah, and just to add to what Joshua said there, I think it's important to note as well that whilst we tend to focus on candidates and people who are elected or going for election, what we have to remember is that not everybody wants to be a candidate. Not everybody wants to be elected. Some people are the ones who push themselves forward. Some people are the lifters who help them get there in the first place. Some people support by donation, and they think that's the best way they can help the party. You can also be a spokesperson. You can be an administrator. You can, there's so many cogs in the party that we need help with running. And when you are going to run a campaign, one of the things we emphasize to our candidates is that it's not, yes, you are the figurehead, you are the person who, you are the spokesperson, but it is just as much about the team behind you. And it's about building that team and helping to get people into that team in the first place. So if you can bring people into your team, get them involved, get them to feel that they are helpful in some ways, that in itself is another way of developing. Get involved with a team, get involved with a campaign, get involved with a group. You don't necessarily have to be the person thrust at the front, because for most people a lot of people are very apprehensive about that. The first time you got taken out door knocking, you stood at the back thinking, do I really have to go? Do I really have to go there on my own and talk to somebody? But these are the kinds of things that, we talk to people about and explain to them about what they can do. Start where you're comfortable and see where that takes you. And very often you may decide that your role is not necessarily to be the candidate, but you may be very influential in getting that candidate elected.
Yeah, and on this topic, sorry, Ade, on this topic, I think a really special shout out needs to go to the Liberal Democrat Campaign for Racial Equality. Very similar name to us, the Racial Diversity Campaign, but a different organisation. And LDCRE, led by Roderick Lynch, are a great example of how people across the party, whether they're of colour or not, can come together to campaign to achieve better outcomes, both internal party outcomes and just societal outcomes. For people of colour, they do an amazing job. And let me give you just one example, actually, of where they have been able to use their influence without necessarily all being elected representatives. So during the leadership campaign between Ed and Layla, they put pressure on both candidates to adopt the Rooney rule for selections for parliamentary seats. Now, the Rooney rule is something that kind of derives from American football, and it's essentially a scheme or a rule that would dictate that at least one person on every interview shortlist must be a person of colour. And translated into the Liberal Democrats, the LDCRE have asked that on every shortlist for a parliamentary selection, every slate of candidates that go out to members to select their potential next MP candidate, one of them must be of colour at least, and both leadership candidates committed to that rule, which is, I think could have a really profound impact on racial diversity across, our candidate pool, and eventually on the green benches in the House of Commons for the Liberal Democrats. But that just goes to show what a great impact an organisation within the party like LDCRE can have. You don't have to be elected.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that totally. LDCRE doing a brilliant job. Sometimes, it's, because they ask the tough questions in the party. They challenge the party. They keep pushing the party to say, you can do better, you can do better. It's not about saying, oh, this is great, we have great policies. We can do better. When are we going to see those results? Where is the funding? It's, one of these things, because sometimes with these things, you need to put your money where your mouth is as well. So they are very, very good at pushing all these buttons and speaking to the top people and making sure that they're holding them accountable. LDCRE were very, very instrumental in the Dorothy Thornhill report after the last election, for example. Previous elections, they've talked about it, but they actually pulled no punches, and I was actually pleasantly surprised to see the emphasis, because it is a very, very big part of the community. We're missing, 15% of the whole community. And it's not just about ourselves, it's about the voters. If we're not getting those voters to vote for us in the first place, because they're almost exclusively non-Lib Dem, if those voters are not voting for us, we're missing out on a very big chunk of people, who can get us more seats in all elections. So it's not just about an internal Lib Dem thing, because you need to say we need to be looking outside as well.
Yeah. And, this comes back to your question, John, around, why is diversity important? Well, I would argue that, the reason first and foremost is that if you have lots of differing voices in a room, you've got more ideas in the room, you've got more great ideas to choose from, and the best ideas win out. Or that was kind of Mill's very liberal, kind of Darwinian theory of ideas, which I think is often true. So that's a great reason for diversity. But to the point that Ade has just made, for those who are not convinced by that, there is a business case for diversity. If you have more diverse candidates, if you have more diverse spokespeople, who are leading the way in those kind of rallying cries for your party, you will get more people from diverse communities voting for you, which means you will win more seats and be more likely to win more power. It's as simple as that. And
I think I want to you've kind of led perfectly. We didn't plan this, but you have actually led perfectly to what I was going to say, because, there are a lot of parties, local parties throughout the UK that are not massive, particularly for the Lib Dems. They're quite small, and there could be a mindset of kind of, it's one more thing we have to deal with. Is it effort to go and try and engage and things like that? But actually, the point is that in the long run, if you were taking an analysis of what it would mean in the long run, because a lot of local parties struggle to get candidates, and so if you start engaging with other communities within your area, you might find suddenly things get a lot easier in terms of the effort to find candidates becomes a lot easier. And and otherwise you're limiting your talent pool to only a set amount and actually making it harder for yourself.
I agree with you absolutely there. I think when you talk to people, you're more likely to get people involved and people wanting to support you. Yesterday after work, it was about this time, I dashed out to deliver some leaflets, so it's, I thought, before it starts raining. And, and a chap came up to me, I knocked on, I was about to put the leaflets in his door and he opened the door. And I've spoken to him in the past, and he just says, "Oh, okay, I'll help. I'll give you that." Called out his son, who wants to be involved in politics, called him out to meet me. His son's, keen to get involved. That's because I went there and because I spoke to them. Okay, I was delivering leaflets in an area that I know, but that would not happen if I hadn't been out there in the first place. So that's the way that we develop ourselves. It's that, classic thing that Tim Farron says, pick a ward and win it. It's slightly harder than that, but
but you've got to have that start.
Yes, I know.
Absolutely.
If you don't start, you will not get there in the first place. You will not get there. So it's just one of the things. And our role at the RDC is to say, how do we help people to learn about and understand what they need to do? And we're talking from the very, very basics of somebody who's a member, who's a member, who says, I want to get involved. I want to do a bit more. What can I do? So starting from the what, then we go to the how, you go to the where. What do you need to do to prepare yourself, regardless of what it is? What do you need to do to prepare yourself? What do you need to do? What do you need to learn? And in a way, you could argue this is something we should be doing for all candidates. But we are aware that there's a specific need to focus a bit more on this side of the fence, just because we're so bad at it, in terms of our overall output. And I think it's something that is really needed in the party. It's been done with the Campaign for Gender Balance, who have produced, some very, very brilliant candidates. And it's also paid out. We now have, far more women MPs than men. So you could say it's been very successful, albeit we're talking about very small numbers. So it's not right to use such small numbers to say that we've done brilliantly on the yes. But what we now need to do is to say, how are we going to be pushing towards the 13% of our target seat candidates being from, being people of color? How do we get to that kind of level? Not just in all, because in all seats is easy. We just pick people in areas where they can't win. What we need to do is to say, who have we got? Who is talented? How do we develop them? And how do we help people achieve their maximum potential?
Yeah, and the old saying is, principles are easy when they're not tested. If we believe that actually we need to get more people of colour elected, then putting them in seats where they're likely to win is the only thing that matters.
I'm a councillor in Solihull. It's 4%, 4% ethnic minority. So,
yeah. Before I leave, kind of give Josh the final say on this kind of thing, on where he thinks what we can all do. I should just point out, if you go to the website libdemrdc.org, the big review is on there. So do log on. Do give your thoughts, do, like I say, do the survey, give them as much information as they can, because the more information you get, the more likely we're going to have, even more data on what we can do. So Josh, I suppose, final point to you is kind of saying, what can local parties like mine, I've told you what we're doing in Preston, what can they do starting tomorrow to help get our party more diverse?
I think the first thing that can be done is to ring up your regional diversity officer from your regional party, because they will have a toolkit of different resources that you'll be able to use on a step-by-step basis to start, first of all, working out where you're at in terms of diversity before you then go out and act accordingly. So bite-sized chunks in that way. I think something else that people can do is go and join the Liberal Democrat Campaign for Racial Equality, because through them you'll receive loads of updates on some of the things that they're doing. They'll invite you to their events that they run on Zoom, etc. And that's a really great way to connect with other people in different parts of the country, some of whom have really successful records in their local party of engaging with diverse communities, so that you're able to learn some lessons from them and apply them in your own constituency. So I guess just remember that you're not alone. This isn't, like launching some kind of startup that nobody has heard of before and that nobody wants. You're not flogging a dead horse by any means. This is something that lots of people are working on. There's lots of expertise in the party. Use it.
And he missed out one thing. Put them in touch with the RDC.
Absolutely. But I just want to thank you both. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Addy, for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. It's so important. We will never grow as a party unless we get this right. That's it, because there's only so many posh suburban areas that Lib Dems can fight. We have to get beyond those sorts of our typical base seats. So thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, you guys know you're more than welcome to come on anytime. You know, you've got my idea. We can't get Josh off the podcast now since we gave him one shot. So, but thank you so much. Thank you all to all the listeners for watching either on YouTube or listening to us via a podcast. Do subscribe to the Lib Dem Podcast on all your various providers. You can follow us at LibDem Pod. My name is John Potter. You can follow myself at John Potter LD. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back very soon. And until the final time, thank you, Josh. Thank you, Addy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for listening.